The gas station was nearly empty when I pulled in, just past midnight. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting sickly yellow pools onto the cracked pavement. My rig groaned as I eased it to a stop by the only working pump. I could hear the hum of cicadas, the distant howl of something too far to recognize, and the rustling of trees in the wind. A storm was brewing. I stepped out of my truck, stretching my stiff legs, and looked around. There was an unsettling quiet, like the place was holding its breath. The only sign of life was the old man inside, watching me through the smudged window of the gas station. He was thin, his skin like paper stretched over brittle bones. He wore a tattered flannel shirt and a cap that had probably been red once, but had long since faded to a dull brown. His eyes, clouded but sharp, followed my every move. I pushed open the glass door and the bell above jingled. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and motor oil. "Storm's coming," the old man said before I could even reach for a drink. His voice was rough, like he had spent a lifetime breathing in smoke and gravel. "Yeah, I saw the forecast," I replied, grabbing a bottle of water. I set it on the counter, reaching for my wallet. The old man didn't move. "You ain't thinking of taking Willow Creek, are ya?" I stopped. "Willow Creek?" His lips pressed into a thin line. "Shortcut off the next exit, shaves off a good 20 miles. But you best keep on the main road. You don't want to go down there." I chuckled, shaking my head. "I've been driving these roads for years. I think I can handle a back road." His eyes darkened, and for the first time, I noticed his hands trembling. "Ain't about the road, son." The way he said it sent a shiver up my spine. "What is it then?" I asked, half amused, half intrigued. He leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. "They call it the Highway Phantom." I exhaled sharply through my nose. "You trying to spook me?" He didn't smile. "Folks go missing down that way. Always the same story. Last seen on Willow Creek, truck found empty, driver gone. No signs of struggle, no tracks leading away." He licked his lips, glancing out the window as if expecting something to be waiting in the shadows. "And every time someone goes missing, a storm follows." A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. I smirked. "Well, if a storm's coming, I'd rather take the shortcut and beat it home." His face hardened. "You ain't listening. They never find the bodies, son." Something in his tone gave me pause. I'd heard my fair share of ghost stories at truck stops, urban legends passed around to keep drivers awake. But this guy, he wasn't telling it for entertainment. He believed every word. Still, I wasn't about to let some old man's warning shake me. I slapped a 20 on the counter and grabbed my water. "I'll be fine." The old man's eyes locked onto mine, cold and unblinking. "Then God help you." The bell jingled behind me as I stepped out. The wind had picked up, rattling the sign above the station. I shook off the uneasy feeling and climbed back into my truck. The GPS gave me two options: stay on the highway or take the shortcut down Willow Creek. I hesitated, the old man's words playing in my head. No signs of struggle, no tracks leading away. I scoffed. "Yeah, right." I tapped the screen. Shortcut it was. And as I pulled out onto the road, the first raindrop splattered against my windshield. Thunder rolled. I didn't look back. I should have. The rain came fast. Within minutes of turning onto Willow Creek, the storm had swallowed the sky. My wiper struggled against the downpour, streaking water across the glass instead of clearing it. The headlights barely cut through the dark, the road ahead twisting and narrow. Something about this place felt wrong. I told myself it was just the storm, the darkness playing tricks on my tired mind. But deep down, I knew better. The trees loomed taller here, their branches curling inward like skeletal fingers reaching for the truck. The pavement cracked and crumbled in places, faded road lines barely visible under the steady sheet of rain. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, tires shrieking against the wet asphalt. The truck skidded slightly before lurching to a stop, just feet away from the figure. It was a man, At least I thought it was. He stood perfectly still, drenched, his clothes hanging off him like they'd been soaked for days. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, his face obscured by the rain and darkness. I leaned forward, squinting. "Hey!" I called, but my voice barely carried over the storm. No response. The way he stood there, motionless, sent a cold knot twisting in my gut. Something was off. I reached for the horn and blared it. Still nothing. Just as I was about to grab my flashlight and step out, the figure moved. Not a normal human movement. His whole body jerked, a convulsion that sent him twitching forward. My blood turned to ice. The figure took another staggering step, then another. Something was wrong with his legs. They bent the wrong way. My hands clenched the wheel, heart hammering. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to drive. But I was frozen, staring as the thing got closer. That's when I saw its face, or lack of one. Where eyes should have been, there were only deep black voids. His mouth, too wide, too stretched, hung open in a silent scream. Water dripped from his chin, but he never blinked, never breathed. I didn't wait. Slamming the truck into reverse, I hit the gas, tires spinning against the slick road. The truck lurched backward, but just as I started to turn, my headlights flickered, and he was gone. Not moved, not ran away, just gone. I sat there, breath shallow, pulse thudding in my ears. The road ahead was empty, nothing but the rain hammering down on the pavement. For a moment, I thought maybe I imagined it. Maybe exhaustion was messing with my mind. Then, a whisper. Right behind me. Low. Wet. Wrong. Keep driving. I didn't look. I didn't think. I just slammed my foot on the gas and tore down Willow Creek as fast as my rig would take me. The rain grew heavier, but I didn't care. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I had never been more terrified in my life. Then I checked my mirrors and nearly swerved off the road. The figure, that thing, was standing in my trailer's reflection, head tilted, grinning that impossible grin. Watching me, I didn't blink, didn't breathe. And then, the headlights cut out, and the truck went black. The moment the headlights cut out, the truck was swallowed in darkness. No streetlights, no passing cars, just the suffocating blackness pressing in from all sides. And I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Something was in the cab with me. My breath hitched, hands tightening on the wheel. The only sounds were the rain hammering against the windshield and the distant rumble of thunder. Then, a wet, dragging noise, slow, deliberate. Inside, my chest tightened. I forced myself to look, just a quick flick of my eyes to the rearview mirror. And there it was, perched in the sleeper cab, its face barely visible in the stuttering glow of the dashboard lights. Those hollow, empty sockets locked onto mine. Its grin wider now, stretched beyond human limits, curling up to where its eyes should have been. Its jaw hung open, something thick and dark dripping from its mouth onto the floor. It twitched, a sickening, bone-popping jerk. Then it whispered, "You're going the wrong way." I lunged for the ignition, my fingers fumbling in blind panic. The engine sputtered, once, twice, before roaring back to life. The headlights flared on, and for the briefest second I saw the thing in the mirror, its head twitching violently, that grin splitting wider. Then the light filled the cab, and it was gone. I didn't wait. Slamming the truck into gear, I floored the gas. The rig roared down the wet pavement, tires skidding, back end fishtailing. My heart pounded so hard I thought my ribs would crack. The storm raged, trees whipping in the wind as lightning split the sky. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look in the mirrors again. But I could still feel it, still hear it. That wet, dragging sound like something crawling just out of sight. Then, up ahead, headlights, a vehicle. I almost sobbed in relief. Someone else was on this god-forsaken road. I flashed my high beams, honking my horn desperately. The car slowed, pulling onto the shoulder. As I got closer, I could see it was an old, beat-up sedan. Rusted, weathered. And then my stomach dropped. Because I knew that car. It had been parked outside the gas station. The old man's car. I pulled up alongside it, tires skidding to a stop. My hands were slick with sweat, my pulse thundering in my ears. The driver's side window rolled down, and there he was, the old man. His face was pale, eyes hollowed out with something I couldn't place. The rain plastered his thinning white hair to his skull. He looked at me, expression unreadable, and then he shook his head. "You shouldn't have come down here." I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on the wheel. What the hell is going on? His lips parted, but before he could answer, a scream tore through the night. Not human, something else, something hungry. Then, the sedan's headlights flickered. The old man's face twisted in terror. "Drive," he whispered. "Now." I didn't ask questions. I stomped the gas, the truck lurching forward. The old man's car disappeared in the rain behind me, swallowed by the storm. But before I lost sight of it completely, I saw something move behind him. Something tall, something grinning. And then the road twisted, and I was alone again, alone with it. The truck barreled down the rain-slicked road, my knuckles white against the wheel. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it over the storm. My head spun with what I'd just seen. The old man, the impossible figure behind him. That grin. I needed to wake up. This had to be a nightmare. But the deep, clawing fear in my gut told me otherwise. I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. I had to get off Willow Creek. Lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the road for a split second. That's when I saw it. A bridge. An old, crumbling one-lane bridge stretching over a swollen river. The kind with rusted metal rails and wooden planks barely held together. The storm had turned the river beneath into a raging, foaming monster, water slamming against the supports with terrifying force. My stomach clenched. Something about this place felt final. I slowed just enough to make sure the bridge wouldn't collapse under my rig. That's when I saw the first handprint. Wet, smudged, streaked down the guardrails. Then another and another. Hundreds of them, all leading across the bridge. My throat tightened. I wanted to turn around, but I couldn't. The road was too narrow. I had no choice. I eased the truck forward, the bridge groaning under the weight. I held my breath, watching as each plank beneath my wheels creaked and bowed. The storm raged around me, lightning splitting the sky. And in the flash of light, I saw something move. Not ahead of me, below. My stomach lurched. The river wasn't just water anymore. They were in it. Figures. Dozens of them. Pale, half-submerged bodies floating beneath the surface, their faces twisted in agony. Mouths gaping open, arms outstretched, clawing at the air. No, not floating. Reaching. For me. The truck lurched as the bridge buckled slightly. My breath hitched, but I kept moving, inching forward. The figures writhed below, their movements jerky, unnatural. Their mouths opened and closed, whispering something I couldn't hear over the storm. Then, the CB radio crackled to life. Static. At first, just static. Then, breathing. Wet. Ragged. Wrong. A voice slithered through the speakers. Familiar. "You should have listened." My blood ran cold. It was the old man. "You're already dead, son." The radio screeched, a burst of static so loud I clamped my hands over my ears. The truck jerked, metal groaning beneath me. Then something slammed against my driver's side window. I barely had time to react before I saw it. A face pressed against the glass. Not human. Its skin was bloated, waterlogged, its mouth stretched impossibly wide. A sickening, gurgling noise filled the cab as it stared at me through hollow sockets, its jagged teeth clicking together. A hand slapped the window next, the fingers too long, too thin, scraping, dragging. I let out a choked scream, slamming my foot on the gas. The truck roared forward, the bridge shuddering under the weight. The thing's grinning face vanished in the blur of rain as I shot across the bridge. And then, crack! The bridge collapsed behind me. I barely made it. My trailer fishtailed as I cleared the last plank, the rear wheels scraping the edge before the entire structure gave way. Wood and metal groaned, snapping like brittle bones as the remains of the bridge plunged into the churning water below. The last thing I saw before it disappeared was the faces, dozens of them, staring up at me, grinning. Then, silence. I didn't stop. I didn't breathe. I just drove. Because somehow I knew this wasn't over. The road stretched on, slick with rain, vanishing into the storm ahead. My breath came in ragged gasps, my hands locked on the wheel, fingers stiff and trembling. I had made it off the bridge, but I wasn't safe. I knew that now, because I could still feel it. That presence, watching me, following me. I checked the mirrors, even though every instinct screamed not to. Something was running behind the truck. Not a car, not an animal. Something else. Its shape flickered in and out of view, distorted by the rain, but I could see the way it moved. Wrong. Its limbs jerked with unnatural speed, its head lolling from side to side. The way it ran, not on 2 legs, not on 4, but something in between, sent ice down my spine. I slammed the gas. The truck lurched forward, the tires spitting water as I roared down the highway. The speedometer climbed 50, 60, 70 miles, but no matter how fast I went, it kept up. I could hear it now. The wet, slapping sound of bare feet against pavement. And something else. Laughter. Low, gurgling. Wrong. A whisper scraped against the back of my skull. Let me in. The dashboard lights flickered. The truck shuddered, the wheel jerking in my hands. I fought to keep control, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gulps. I wasn't going to make it. Then, up ahead, headlights. Bright, piercing through the storm. A building, a sign, a diner. A flood of relief hit me so hard I almost sobbed. Civilization, a place with people, a way out. I slammed the brakes, the truck fishtailing as I swerved into the lot. Gravel crunched beneath my tires as I skidded to a stop just outside the diner's front door. For the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself hope. I killed the engine and flung the door open, stumbling out into the rain. The storm raged on, thunder shaking the ground as I sprinted toward the diner. But then, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The parking lot was full, cars lined up, engines off, doors shut. But there was no one inside. Through the fogged-up windows, I could see the booths, the counter, the old jukebox in the corner. The neon sign hummed, flickering against the rain-streaked glass. But there were no people, no customers, no workers. Just empty, like they had all been sitting there 1 second and the next, gone. My stomach twisted. I turned, glancing back at my truck. The road behind me was empty. No sign of the thing that had been chasing me. But the relief didn't last. Because then I saw it. In the diner window, a reflection, not mine. His. The old man, standing behind me, grinning. I spun around, but he wasn't there. Just the wind and the storm and the endless road stretching back into the dark. Then, a sound, low, distant. A bell. The diner doorbell, ringing. From inside, like someone had just walked in, but there was no one there. The lights flickered. The radio behind the counter crackled to life, a garbled voice cutting through the static. It took me a second to realize it was my voice. You shouldn't have come down here. The words I had heard from the old man, my own voice saying them back to me. Then the jukebox clicked on. A song started playing, low, distorted, a slow, dragging tune. I knew that song. I had heard it before. And then it hit me. The music, the truck, the old man, the storm, the bridge, the warning. I had been here before. I had driven this road before. And I had never left. The song crackled through the jukebox, warped and distant, as if it had been playing for decades. A slow, dragging melody, the kind that sticks in your head long after you've heard it. I stood frozen just inside the diner, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gulps. The air smelled stale, wrong, like rain-soaked wood and something else, something rotten. The booths were empty. The coffee pot sat cold and untouched. A plate of food rested on the counter, half-eaten, the fork still sticking into a mound of eggs. Like someone had just been here, but they weren't. The place was a ghost town, and yet the door had just opened. Something had come inside. I took a slow step forward. My boots squeaked against the checkered floor, the sound swallowed by the humming of the flickering lights. Then, a whisper. "You know how this ends." I spun around. Nothing. Just the empty booths, the empty counter, the empty space where something should have been. The jukebox glitched, the music stuttering and warping before slowing down too much. The notes stretched, drawn out into a garbled mess of sound, like a record melting in the heat. The lights buzzed harder, and then I saw it. The clock, hanging above the counter. The hands were moving backward. Tick, tick, tick. My pulse thundered in my ears. No, this wasn't possible. I took a step back, shaking my head, trying to clear the fog of panic choking me. I turned toward the door, toward escape, and stopped. The glass was black. The outside world was gone. No rain, no parking lot, no truck, just darkness swallowing everything. I stumbled backward, my chest tightening, my lungs struggling for air. Then, the bell above the diner's door jingled, slow, like someone was walking in, but I couldn't see them. I could only hear them. The wet sound of bare feet dragging across the tile. I bolted, racing past the counter into the kitchen, my hands fumbling for a door. Any door. I shoved through the swinging metal one at the back, bursting into a hallway that shouldn't have been there. It was too long, stretched impossibly far, lined with doors, each one identical, each one closed. I hesitated, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then, a knock. One of the doors, a slow, deliberate knock, the kind that means I know you're there. Then another, and another, doors shaking as unseen fists pounded against them. The hallway trembled, the lights overhead flickering violently. The air was thick with the sound of knocking, hundreds of fists hammering against the doors, the walls, the ceiling. And then, all at once, silence. I stood there, chest heaving, sweat dripping down my back. I didn't want to open one of the doors. I had to. I reached out with a shaking hand and gripped the nearest knob. Cold. So cold. I swallowed, turned it, and the old man was inside, sitting in a chair, waiting for me. His face was hollow, skin sagging like it had been soaked through. His clothes were dripping wet, pooling water onto the floor. But his eyes, they were clear, alive. He watched me, head tilting slightly. Then he spoke. "You remember now, don't you?" The words hit me like a fist. I stumbled back, shaking my head, not wanting to understand. But I did. Somewhere deep down, I knew. I had driven this road before. I had stopped at the gas station. I had met the old man. I had ignored his warning. And then, I had taken the shortcut, down Willow Creek. I had never left. My body turned ice cold. The old man sighed, staring at me with something that almost looked like pity. "You don't come back from Willow Creek." The words echoed, sinking into my bones. Then, from behind me, a wet, gurgling laugh, slow, stretching. The lights blew out, and something grabbed me. The thing's hands were cold, slick, like they'd just crawled up from the bottom of that river. I thrashed, kicking, clawing, but it wouldn't let go. Its fingers dug into my shoulders, pulling me back into the dark. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. It was grinning. A low, wet voice slithered into my ear, my own voice. "You don't come back from Willow Creek." No, that wasn't true. I fought harder, every muscle screaming as I twisted, trying to break free. And then a horn blared, loud, piercing. Headlights exploded through the darkness. For one impossible second, I was blinded, white-hot beams cutting through the void, swallowing the thing holding me. It screamed, a horrible, choked wail like something being dragged into the deep. And then I was falling, slamming into wet pavement, gasping for breath. The roar of an engine filled the air, tires screeched, rain pelted my face. My body ached like I'd been hit by a truck. And then I realized I was back on the road, Willow Creek, alive. I sucked in a breath, rolling onto my side, my chest heaving. The storm still raged, the wind howling through the trees, but it was real, solid. No phantom, no whispers, no twisted, grinning things lurking in the dark. Just the road, just a truck, idling a few feet away. Its cab light flickered on, and then the door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered. His rain-soaked hat was pulled low over his eyes. He took a cautious step forward, boots splashing in the puddles. "You all right, son?" I blinked. My head was spinning. I pushed myself up, my breath hitching in my throat. I knew that voice. I had heard it before. Slowly, I lifted my gaze and felt my blood turn to ice. It was me. The same worn jacket, the same weathered boots, the same exhaustion in his face, but older, like he had lived through something I hadn't, like he had survived. I stumbled back, heart hammering, my mind screaming, "This isn't possible." But the man just sighed, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw. "This road don't let go easy," he muttered, more to himself than to me. Then his eyes met mine, clear, steady. "But you? You got out." I swallowed hard. "You fought," he interrupted. "Most don't." His lips pressed into a firm line. "Most let it take them." The wind howled through the trees. The storm was breaking, the rain starting to slow. I was here. I was real. But how? The older me nodded toward the road behind him. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." He turned, stepping back toward his truck. "Just drive, and don't ever take this road again." I hesitated, then asked the one question burning in my mind. What happens to the ones who don't fight? The man, the older me, froze, his hand resting on the truck door. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, without looking back, he spoke. "They stay." And then he climbed into the truck, the engine roaring to life. I stood there, soaked to the bone as his tail lights faded into the night. The storm had passed. I turned, staring down the empty stretch of highway ahead of me. The real highway. No signs of Willow Creek, no twisted figures lurking in the woods. Just a road leading home. And so, I started walking. Because I was alive. Because I had won. And because I would never